In 1938, a patent attorney working in a cramped apartment in Queens performed an experiment that would change every office in the world. Chester Carlson pressed a glass slide coated with sulfur powder against a metal plate, exposed it to light, and dusted it with lycopodium spores. When he peeled away the slide, an image appeared, 10-22-38 Astoria. It was the first photocopy ever made. Carlson stared at it, hands trembling. He knew he had invented something revolutionary. What he didn't know was that it would take 21 years, 20 company rejections, and nearly losing everything before anyone would care. The world in 1938 had no need for copying machines, or so every corporation told him. Documents were retyped by secretaries or reproduced using messy carbon paper. If you needed multiple copies, you used a mimeograph machine that required special masters and left ink-stained hands. The idea that someone would want to instantly duplicate any document seemed absurd. IBM looked at Carlson's invention and said no. Kodak said no. General Electric said no. 20 companies in total rejected him. They all said the same thing. There's no market for this. Chester Floyd Carlson was born in 1906 in Seattle, the son of a barber who suffered from tuberculosis and arthritis. His childhood was defined by poverty and illness. His father could barely work. His mother died when Chester was 17. To support them both, Chester worked odd jobs: janitor, printer's assistant, chemical plant worker. He was brilliant in school but had no money for college. He saved every penny for years, working full-time while attending junior college at night. In 1928, he transferred to the California Institute of Technology to study physics. He was older than his classmates, exhausted from working to pay tuition, and desperately poor. But he graduated in 1930, just as the Great Depression destroyed the job market. With a physics degree and no prospects, he took the only job he could find, a position at Bell Labs in New York. It didn't last. Layoffs came quickly. For months, he survived on odd jobs, barely eating, sleeping in cheap rooming houses. In 1933, he found work as a patent attorney at P.R. Mallory Company, a small electronics firm in Manhattan. The job required him to make copies of patent drawings and specifications, often dozens of copies of the same document. The only methods available were expensive, time-consuming, and unreliable. Carbon paper produced smudged copies. Photostat machines were huge, costly, and required trained operators. Carlson, whose arthritis was worsening, found the repetitive work painful. There had to be a better way. He began researching in the New York Public Library, reading everything he could find about printing, photography, and physics. Most copying methods used wet chemicals, which were messy and required special paper. Carlson wanted something dry, simple, and fast. He found a clue in an obscure 1935 article about photoconductivity, the property of certain materials to conduct electricity when exposed to light. Selenium, he learned, was strongly photoconductive. If he could coat a surface with selenium, charge it electrically, expose it to an image, and attract powder to the charged areas, he might be able to create a copy. It sounded simple. It wasn't. Carlson rented a small room behind a beauty salon in Astoria, Queens, and set up a makeshift laboratory. He had no funding, no assistance, no institution backing him, just his own savings and an obsessive belief that his idea would work. He spent months experimenting with sulfur, selenium, and various powders. His clothes were stained, his hands were burned. His landlord complained about the smell. His wife grew frustrated with his obsession, but Carlson kept working. On October 22, 1938, after hundreds of failed attempts, he finally succeeded. He wrote 10-22-38 Astoria on a glass slide, placed it on a zinc plate coated with sulfur, exposed it to a bright light, and blew lycopodium powder across it. The powder stuck to the charged areas, forming an image. He pressed a sheet of wax paper against it, and the powder transferred. It was crude, blurry, and barely readable, but it was a copy. Carlson called his process electrophotography. Later, it would be renamed Xerography, from the Greek words for dry writing. He filed for a patent in 1939 and began the long, humiliating process of trying to sell his invention. He approached every major corporation he could think of: IBM, Kodak, RCA, General Electric, Remington Rand. He showed them his prototype, explained the process, demonstrated the copies. Every single one turned him down. IBM's engineers told him the machine would be too complicated and expensive. Kodak said photography was better. RCA wasn't interested in office equipment. General Electric didn't see a market. Over and over, Carlson heard the same refrain: no one will pay to copy documents. The rejections were devastating. Carlson had invested years and his entire savings into the invention. His marriage collapsed under the financial strain. He was alone, broke, and running out of options. But he refused to give up. He believed, with a certainty that bordered on madness, that his invention was important. Offices everywhere wasted time and money copying documents by hand. His process could change that. Someone somewhere had to see it. In 1944, after 6 years of rejections, he finally found a believer. The Battelle Memorial Institute, a non-profit research organization in Ohio, agreed to help develop the technology in exchange for a share of future profits. It was a lifeline. Battelle's engineers refined Carlson's crude process, experimenting with better photoconductors, improved powders, and more reliable charging methods. Progress was slow and expensive. Years passed. Carlson, now working as a patent attorney to survive, watched from the sidelines as his invention slowly evolved. By 1947, the process had improved enough to demonstrate publicly. Battelle presented it at a conference, calling it Xerography, and a few people took notice, including a small photography company in Rochester, New York called Haloid. Haloid was struggling. It made photographic paper but was being crushed by Kodak. The company's president, Joseph Wilson, was desperate for a breakthrough product. When he saw a demonstration of xerography, he was transfixed. The copies were still poor quality, the machines were slow, and the technology was unproven. But Wilson saw potential. In 1947, Haloid licensed Carlson's patents and formed a partnership with Battelle. It was an enormous gamble. Haloid was a tiny company with limited resources, betting everything on an unproven technology that every major corporation had rejected. Engineers at Haloid spent years trying to turn Carlson's laboratory experiment into a commercial product. The challenges were immense. The selenium drums degraded quickly. The powder, called toner, clumped and smeared. The machines jammed constantly. Early prototypes were enormous, unreliable, and expensive. The first commercial xerographic copier, the Model A, launched in 1949. It was a disaster. The machine was complicated, required 14 manual steps to make a single copy, and cost thousands of dollars. Almost no one bought it. Critics said Haloid had wasted its money on a novelty. Investors grew nervous. Wilson faced pressure to abandon the project, but he refused. He believed in xerography, and more importantly, he believed in Chester Carlson, the quiet, persistent inventor who had been rejected by everyone else. Through the 1950s, Haloid poured money into research. Engineers simplified the process, improved the toner, and designed better drums. Carlson, now a consultant and minor shareholder, offered advice, but mostly stayed out of the way. He had done his part. The invention was real. Now it was up to others to make it practical. Slowly, painstakingly, the technology improved. By 1958, Haloid was ready to try again. The Xerox 914, introduced in 1959, was everything the Model A wasn't. It was fast, reliable, and easy to use. You placed a document on glass, pressed a button, and seconds later a copy emerged. No chemicals, no mess, no special paper. Just a perfect copy. The 914 could make 7 copies per minute, far faster than any other method. And unlike earlier copiers, it used plain paper, which was cheap and readily available. The machine was revolutionary. It was also expensive. The 914 cost $29,500 and equivalent to over $300,000 today. Haloid knew that few companies would pay that much up front. So Wilson made a brilliant decision. Instead of selling the machines, Haloid would lease them for $95 per month, which included 2,000 free copies. Additional copies cost just 4 cents each. Suddenly, the 914 was affordable. Businesses could try it without a huge investment. If it worked, they'd keep it. If not, they'd return it. The response was overwhelming. Companies loved the 914. Secretaries loved it. Managers loved it. Within months, demand exceeded supply. Haloid couldn't build machines fast enough. Orders poured in from law firms, government agencies, universities, and corporations. The 914 became the most successful industrial product launch in American history. In 1961, Haloid officially changed its name to Xerox Corporation. The company that had gambled everything on a rejected invention was now worth hundreds of millions. Chester Carlson, who had been turned down by 20 companies and nearly gave up, became a multimillionaire. But wealth didn't change him. He lived modestly, avoided publicity, and gave away most of his money. He donated millions to education, civil rights organizations, and scientific research. He funded scholarships for poor students, remembering his own desperate struggle to afford college. When asked about his success, he always credited luck and persistence, never genius. By the mid-1960s, Xerox was one of the fastest-growing companies in the world. The word Xerox became a verb. People didn't make copies, they Xeroxed documents. The 914 and its successors transformed offices everywhere. Tasks that once took hours now took seconds. Legal briefs, memos, reports, and forms could be duplicated instantly. The explosion of paperwork that defined the late 20th century was made possible by Carlson's invention. For better or worse, he had enabled the modern bureaucratic state. Carlson himself remained humble. He rarely gave interviews and avoided the spotlight. Friends described him as quiet, thoughtful, and generous. He remarried in 1946, and his second wife, Doris, supported his philanthropic work. Together, they gave away over $100 million, a staggering sum for the time. Carlson was particularly interested in supporting underdog causes and unknown researchers, people like himself who struggled for recognition. He knew what it felt like to be ignored. In 1968, at the age of 62, Chester Carlson died suddenly of a heart attack in a movie theater in New York. He had been watching a film alone. His death received little attention. The newspapers noted that he had invented Xerography and donated to charity, but there were no grand obituaries or public memorials. He had lived quietly and died quietly. Yet his impact on the world was anything but quiet. Every office, every school, every government building relied on his invention. After Carlson's death, Xerox continued to dominate the copier market for decades. At its peak in the 1970s, the company was worth billions and employed tens of thousands of people. The 914 was eventually placed in the Smithsonian Institution as a landmark of American innovation. But Xerox's dominance didn't last forever. Japanese companies like Canon and Ricoh entered the market with cheaper, more reliable machines. By the 1980s, Xerox was struggling. The company that had revolutionized copying was being out-copied by its competitors. The irony wasn't lost on historians. Xerox had succeeded because it took a chance on a rejected inventor and an unproven technology. But once it became dominant, it grew complacent. The company famously developed many of the technologies that would define personal computing, including the graphical user interface and the mouse, at its Palo Alto research center, but Xerox failed to commercialize them. Steve Jobs and Apple took those ideas and built an empire. Xerox, like IBM and Kodak before it, learned that past success is no guarantee of future relevance. Yet Carlson's invention endured. Even as digital technology reduced the need for paper copies, Xerography remained essential. Laser printers, which appeared in the 1980s, used the same basic process Carlson had invented in his Queens apartment. Photocopiers evolved, but never disappeared. In developing countries where digital infrastructure lagged, copy shops became vital community hubs. Carlson's dry copying process, dismissed as useless in 1938, had become a pillar of global communication. The story of Chester Carlson is a study in persistence against overwhelming rejection. 20 companies told him no. Experts said his invention was unnecessary. His own wife left him because he wouldn't give up. He spent years in poverty, experimenting alone in a rented room, with no institutional support and no guarantee of success. What kept him going? He never fully explained. Perhaps it was stubbornness. Perhaps it was faith in the idea. Or perhaps it was simply that he had no other choice. He had invested too much to quit. His story also reveals the limits of corporate vision. IBM, Kodak, and GE weren't stupid. They had brilliant engineers and market analysts, but they couldn't see the need for copying because the need didn't yet exist. In 1938, offices functioned without copiers. Secretaries retyped documents. It was slow and inefficient, but it worked. Carlson's invention didn't fill an obvious gap. It created a new possibility. Once people could copy documents instantly, they discovered they needed to copy documents instantly. The technology created the demand. This is the paradox of innovation. Truly revolutionary ideas often seem unnecessary until they exist. The market doesn't demand them because the market can't imagine them. This is why large corporations, focused on existing customers and proven needs, often miss breakthroughs. They ask, will people buy this? When they should ask, what will people do once this exists? Carlson understood the difference. He didn't invent xerography because businesses asked for it. He invented it because he knew, intuitively, that once it existed, it would be indispensable. Joseph Wilson, the Haloid executive who bet on Carlson, understood this too. When colleagues questioned the investment, Wilson reportedly said, "We're not selling copiers, we're selling time." That insight was profound. The 914 didn't just copy documents. It gave people back hours of their day. Lawyers could duplicate briefs in minutes instead of hours. Secretaries could make copies without retyping. Efficiency increased across entire industries. The value wasn't in the copies themselves. It was in what people could do with the time they saved. Carlson's legacy is visible in every modern office, but his name is largely forgotten. There are no Carlson Institutes or Carlson Prizes. His story isn't taught in schools. Most people who use copiers and printers have no idea who invented the technology. This anonymity is fitting in a way. Carlson never sought fame. He wanted to solve a problem. He did. The fact that his solution became invisible, so integrated into daily life that no one thinks about it, is perhaps the highest tribute. The best technologies are the ones we don't notice. Chester Floyd Carlson, the poor boy who worked his way through college, the arthritis-suffering patent attorney who couldn't stop copying documents, the persistent inventor who heard no from 20 companies and kept going. He died alone in a movie theater, his fortune given away, his name unknown to most. But every time someone presses a button and a copy emerges, his mind is at work. Every laser printer, every document scanner, every digital copier carries his legacy. The world said it didn't need his invention. He built it anyway. And the world, reluctantly at first and then eagerly, accepted that it had been wrong. The man 20 companies rejected changed every office in the world, not through marketing or hype, but through sheer stubborn belief that a better way existed. His invention didn't conquer the market by force. It simply worked, quietly and efficiently, until no one could imagine working without it. That quiet revolution, born in a rented room in Queens and rejected by every expert, became the foundation of modern document handling. Chester Carlson heard the future. 20 companies told him he was wrong. History proved them all fools.